And that beast that preceded him was the leopard-like beast. And that leopard-like beast had a wounded head, which was the word which represents the Roman Catholic papacy. So the leopard-like beast, from a prophetic standpoint, is not very useful without that head, that principal head. And here we're seeing that this two-horned beast is to speak like the dragon being a symbol of Satan. So the two-horned beast is to speak like Satan using religious themes. He's going to use religion in order to gain access to the people. Because of this, many times when we see activities in the Congress and the courts and the executive branch, people get very frightened and nervous. Oh, this is a Sunday law. And we need not be that, knee-jerky. When we strike it, we need to strike it right. We need to call it correctly and not be the little boy who calls wolf every time. Just like we saw the Gulf War, and when we looked in the war developing, we said, we're going to step back here and look to see if God has provided any other alternative perspective on this war. And many people were shouting, oh, this is the war of Zechariah 14. And we say, not so fast. It's not shaping out that way, just from the start. And so while we do expect to see a major Middle East war in which the United States will fall militarily, we can't shout at every little war and say, oh, America is going to collapse now. We'd look foolish. Nobody would believe our message. And for the same manner, when it comes to the Sunday law, every little thing, every little announcement concerning religion or church involvement with the state, we shout, generally speaking, as Adventists, Sunday law. And if we do that, we'll look foolish and irrelevant. So we want to call it right from the start, so that we are not vacillating. Having said that, as I stated, the dragon is to speak through the government headed up by the two-horned beast. And he speaks through its legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. And when he has all these under his control, and they're speaking with one voice, then we can say that this is it. So, again, verse 11 is telling us the last part, and he spake as the dragon, or as a dragon. But this indefinite article a, as we've seen in all the other translations, because of King James English, it's really the dragon. There's a unique dragon, even the devil and Satan. So for all practical purposes, we'll read it as the dragon. The two-horned beast spake as the dragon, Satan, and exercised all the power of the first beast before him. And the first beast before him, his authority was bequeathed to him by the dragon as well. And in exercising this authority, it says he's to cause the earth and them which dwell therein to worship. That's key. Doesn't matter what else. If it's not worshiping God, then we know that this is false worship. This is dragon worship. And it says it's not the worship of Yahweh that is being advocated. So we must look for an institution of a worship that is inconsistent with that which the Bible pronounces. If we see a worship system that is conforming with what God demands of us, we should not denounce it as satanic. We'd be foolish to do that. He exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. So he's to work in collusion or cahoots with the papal power in advocating or advancing a worship system upon the nation and the world that is patently false, inconsistent with the teachings of Scripture. And that's what we as truth seekers should be looking for. As true Issacharites who understand the times and the signs, we should be looking for those flags and notify the nation and the world as to what is happening. Just like the world needs to be warned of the Assyrian conflict, the nation in particular needs to be warned of the Assyrian conflict that is to brew in the Middle East, so they need to be warned about these spiritual matters as well. We are seeing also that this two-horned beast is to work with an apostate religious system which performs miracle working wonders, which is a form of deception. Verse 14 says that it and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do. And under President Trump's administration, he has installed the office of faith, religious liberty, and faith. And so he has a woman, Paula White, who heads up that branch. And so there's a strong religious push. This is kind of a hands down and no holds barred approach to how far they want to go in making America pray again and bringing religion to the public square, that people are not ashamed of their religion. But these things are not the Sunday law. And it is actually a good thing. America 200 years ago was far more religious than she is today. Just check the Pew Research. 200 years ago, perhaps 95% of the United States professed Christianity, and maybe 90% of them would go to church every weekend, including Sundays. As America became more opulent, church attendance waned. And the same thing happened for the Jewish people. As their financial needs became stronger and their financial interests, became more risky, they started compromising on their spiritual values. And were it not for the diaspora of Jews that came from Europe into the United States, the American Jewry perhaps would have died, because they'd pretty much given up on Sabbath worship. The synagogues were empty, the stores were opened, and synagogues were empty. Stores were opened on the Sabbath, and synagogues were empty on the Sabbath, because they needed to make a living. And they saw no way out than to compromise on this busiest of all business days. So I wanted to bring that out. And we as commandment keepers should always have our eyes and ears tuneful to any act, edict, or involvement of the political process with a religious faith. But I wanted to bring out one other thing here. We have been told on strong authority that the two-horned beast, the two horns represent Protestantism and republicanism. That's what we were told, and I will share that citation with you later. So in the foundation teaching of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the understanding that America was built on a religious and political equation. One is called Protestantism, and the other is called republicanism. Here's Sister White in The Great Controversy, page 441. And he had two horns like a lamb. She's interpreting this passage we just read. And he had two horns like a lamb. The lamb-like horns indicate youth, innocence, and gentleness, fitly representing the character of the United States when presented to the prophet as coming up in 1798. Among the Christian exiles who first fled to America and sought an asylum from royal oppression and priestly intolerance were many who determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. Their views found place in the Declaration of Independence, which sets forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Notice carefully. Representatives enacted by the popular vote. And this is where the republicanism comes in, because it's a representational form of government. Freedom of religious faith was also granted. Every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. So religion took a very important role in the founding of this nation. And it said that the nation will be agnostic insofar as a state religion is concerned. And she continues, Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. Fundamental. Republicanism and Protestantism. And we need to remember, what is Protestantism? Freedom of religion. Freedom to express your religion, to pursue your faith. And Protestantism meant more than that. It meant to debar Roman Catholics from public spaces in this country. That was a fundamental aspect of Protestantism in America. And so we saw the day, we're seeing the days when Protestantism will give rise to Roman Catholicism in its apostasy, or pure Protestantism will apostatize and take on Roman Catholic virtues and values and enforce those upon the conscience of the nation. But don't forget these two. We don't have a Protestant party in America. But it says this is the government. These are the principles of the nation. Republicanism principle and Protestantism principle became the fundamental principles of the nation. These principles, republicanism, Protestantism, are the secret of its power and prosperity. The secret to American lore is Protestantism and republicanism, she states here. The oppressed and downtrodden throughout Christendom have turned to this land with interest and hope. Millions have sought its shores, and the United States has risen to a place among the most powerful nations of the earth. This was written in the 1880s. This is before World Wars I and II and the many other wars between. And America was already seen as the most powerful nation among the most powerful nations on earth. Less than 100 years. And what was the secret to her power? Republicanism and Protestantism, she stated. We also understand that the two horns represent other functions, such as the political parties, the bicameral system of government, the Republican form of government, and the Democrat form of government. Different. So I think they had some confusion in the starting of this country, and so you have the Republicanism and later on a Republican Party. It's built, there's a democratic form of electing candidates, and so you have a democratic government. So the Republicans support the democratic form of government, and the Democrats support the Republican form of government. So sometimes that gets lost in the transfer. But I bring all of this to our attention because of what's in the news right now. And what's in the news right now, from the Times of Israel, only on May 5th, it says here, Trump calls on U.S. Jews to dedicate next Shabbat to America's 250th anniversary celebration. When most Seventh-day Adventists read this, they saw a national Sunday law proclamation. And when I first saw it, it was from an Adventist source. And immediately I saw the alarmism that was going on. We must guard against that. But let's appreciate the news, because there's an undercurrent to it that indeed, as we have said numerous times, Donald Trump's presidency is not an ordinary presidency. This is perhaps one of, maybe the most pivotal presidency in the history of this nation. And for a good reason. He has survived at least a dozen near-death situations where people were on the hunt. He's being hunted like a wild animal right now. There's big game hunting on the head of Donald Trump. And it's not the FBI and the Secret Service that are protecting him. I can assure you of that. And I'll just give you one example later on. But he's not being protected by the human beings around him. Because if it were left to them alone, without divine intervention, he'd be dead meat a long time ago. So let's see some of the things why the Lord is preserving his work until his work is finished. If he gets killed in the line of duty, his work is finished. So we're not making predictions here that he cannot die in office. We're saying that he has a specific work and a very pivotal role to play in the unfolding of prophecies, these end-time prophecies. I wanted to see it from the horse's mouth, hear it from the horse's mouth. So I went to the White House to hear, because that was from the Jews, and you saw how the Jewish community sees it. This is a proclamation for the Jews, not a national proclamation for agnostics and Christians and every other group, Muslims, Hindus, etc. So Jewish American Heritage Month 2026 is the title of this proclamation, and it was so proclaimed on May 4th, 2026, just being mindful that this happened during the week of Passover, or the week of unleavened bread. The week of unleavened bread began from the 2nd through, and some great events that occur on this earth occurred during these seasons. We should always take opportunity to look out for them. For others, that was just May 4th. For us who understand God's appointed time, that was the 3rd day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Here's a proclamation by the President of the United States of America. This Jewish American Heritage Month, we honor the countless contributions of Jewish Americans throughout our nation's 250 glorious years of independence, and we celebrate their unwavering commitment to the values that make our country great, which are faith, family, and freedom. In his letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island in 1790, President George Washington beautifully said, "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." Since the earliest days of our republic, Jewish Americans have helped build the cause of liberty and sustain the greatness of our nation. So, from President George Washington to President Donald Trump, every American president has given a Jewish American declaration or proclamation. It's something that has been built in the fabric, but especially so after the founding of the State of Israel, this became a more prominent feature. And yes, so you could see from the early days of the Republic, that recognition was given to Jewish Americans. But in recent years, we also understand from the university campuses and the political stages that Jewish Americans were under siege. They were being assaulted in this land of liberty, and their right to free press and freedom of worship was greatly strangulated. It goes on. Among them, the Jewish Americans, among them was the iconic Haman Salman, an early supporter of the war for independence. As stories tell us, Salomon was instrumental in the success of our Continental Congress and founding fathers, and rallied support for freedom. He was a zealous advocate against tyranny, and even after imprisonment by the British Crown, he continued his work in defense of freedom. In the end, he gave everything to the success of the American Revolution. Like so many Jewish Americans who follow in his footsteps, Salmon's legacy stands as a testament to the unshakable belief in the American promise. Goes on. In the same letter to the Hebrew congregation at Newport, President Washington proclaimed that the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, no persecution, no assistance. I'm sorry, I read that incorrectly. Start again. In the same letter to the Hebrew congregation at Newport, President Washington proclaimed that the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution, no assistance. Under my leadership, we are aggressively fighting the violence against Jewish Americans that increased under my predecessor, prosecuting hateful criminals to the fullest extent of the law, and working to end the scourge of anti-Semitism throughout our institutions, especially on college campuses. As president, I will never stop fighting to protect our birthright of religious freedom, a sacred right that continues to guide our nation, draw us closer to the Almighty each and every day. Notice he's here saying that he will vigorously fight for the protection of religious freedom. It goes on. Throughout this historic year, we rejoice in the triumph of the American spirit and rededicate ourselves to the cause of liberty and justice for all. In special honor of 250 glorious years of American independence, and on the weekend of Rededicate 250, a national jubilee of prayer, praise, and thanksgiving, Jewish Americans are encouraged to observe a national Sabbath. From sundown on May 15th to nightfall on May 16th, friends, families, and communities of all backgrounds may come together in gratitude for our great nation. This day will recognize the sacred Jewish tradition of setting aside time for rest, reflection, and gratitude to the Almighty. This month, we celebrate the contributions that Jewish Americans have made to our way of life. We honor their role in shaping the country. Rather, we honor their role in shaping the story of our nation, and we remember that religious devotion, learning, and service to others are enduring pillars of a thriving culture. Throughout every trial and triumph, the contributions of Jewish Americans have shaped our past, have strengthened our communities, and will continue to inspire American greatness for generations to come. Now, therefore, I, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, do hereby proclaim May 2026 as Jewish American Heritage Month. I call upon Americans means more broadly, I call upon Americans to celebrate the heritage and contributions of Jewish Americans and to observe this month with appropriate programs, activities, and ceremonies. I further call on all Americans to celebrate their faith and freedom throughout this year, during this month, and especially on Shabbat, to celebrate our 250th year and of the independence of the United States of America, 250th, Donald J. Trump. And that's the extent of the proclamation. I highlighted some things there of interest, and one of the things of great interest is where he said, I further call all Americans, not just Jewish Americans now, but all Americans to celebrate their faith, their faith. America is a pluralistic religious country, and it's a call on all Americans to celebrate their faith, not the national faith. This is not a national Sunday law declaration, nor is it a national Sabbath law declaration. It is an announcement, a proclamation to celebrate Jewish Americans. But having said that, you can see that this sets up a permission pathway whereby political figures can single out a religion to be recognized. They do recognize Eid for the Muslims and some other religions. Maybe the Hindus have their own timetable, I'm not sure. But you could see how the pressure would build within the White House confines, where those who are the president's advisors and those from his Religious Liberty Committee may ask the president to generously give a shout out to the Sunday keeping crowd and ask people to go back to church. But strange enough as it might seem, that is not so necessary at this time. Here's why. Church attendance has been on a rapid increase in America. What about temple attendance in the Jewish community? A significant difference. But in America, there's an upsweep, an exponential growth. The Catholic Church is taking credit for about 120% growth year over year of young people in their churches. The pews are being filled up again. Things are going well. So really there's no strong urge to demand for Christians in America to make Sunday, go to church on Sunday because they're already doing it. But what about the Jewish Americans? Before I go there. Yeah, so this, as I said, it creates a tripwire condition whereby others might take the opportunity to ask the president to make such a proclamation. And when the president makes such a proclamation, it might get the attention of Congress, congressional rulers, and Supreme Court adjudicators. And at a certain point, Congress might say, you know what? This is a tradition that we recognize Sunday as a Sabbath. That can easily happen. But that's not what Donald Trump was advocating. He was advocating a Sabbath rest, and we should celebrate that. This, above all, is as big as Charlie Kirk's book. Here's why. It is calling the attention of the world to know the true Sabbath. Now, Rededicate America is scheduled for May 17th, a Sunday. And Donald Trump will be there if life spares. And he chose to make the proclamation concerning Shabbat and gave the guidelines in paragraph 1 on the screen. From sundown on Friday, May 15th to nightfall on May 16th to guard the edges of the Sabbath, friends, families, and communities of all backgrounds may come together in gratitude for our great nation. This day, May 15th to May 16th, enveloped between two sunsets, will recognize the sacred Jewish tradition of setting aside time for rest, reflection, and gratitude to the Almighty. You know, we have been looking for a Sunday law for a long time as Seventh-day Adventists. But we never, in our wildest imaginations, thought the President of the United States would call attention to the true Bible Sabbath. This is going to provoke a lot of inquiry. On top of Charlie Kirk's book regarding the Sabbath rest, and to stop and take time out for God, this ranks with equal force because it's showing the boundaries of the Sabbath. And we should celebrate that. And if that's what God wants, I've seen comments. This proclamation has called many Christians to open their Bibles, to rediscover that the true Sabbath is from Friday evening sundown to Saturday evening sundown. This is an at-will proclamation, and it's something to celebrate. That the President of the United States did not call for a national Sunday law, but called the rest of the nation to take time out with their Jewish compatriots to recognize the boundaries of Sabbath rest. And I believe God is well pleased with that. Now, if he goes on the other end and promotes Sunday, then God will not be honored with that. So we need to respect what this proclamation has done, what it has not done, and do not go beyond it. Although we have said this can create a pathway for others to come behind and ask the President, can you please, sir, make a proclamation concerning our Sunday? But as I said before, churches are not empty on Sundays. That used to be the case, but those days are rapidly falling away. Now, look at this report here. Here's a Pew Research of May 11th, 2021. The research was done in 2020, and the report published on May 11th, 2021. That's only 2 days from now to make it another anniversary. Jewish Americans in 2020, Jewish practices and customs, Pew Research. Jewish Americans are not a highly religious group, at least by traditional measures of religious observance. This is how the paper started. But many engage in Judaism in some way, whether through holidays, food choices, cultural connections, or life milestones. Jewish Americans. Jewish Americans are less likely, not more, are less likely than U.S. adults, the general population, overall, to attend religious services regularly. That means to attend Sabbath services. Jewish Americans are less likely to attend Sabbath services as compared with their national counterparts. 1 in 5 Jews, that means 20%. Man, that number was put by me. Whenever you see that turquoise number, that's my insertion. 1 in 5 Jews say they attend a synagogue at least once per month. At least once per month. That means 20%. That means 80% of Jews are not attending synagogue once per month. 1 in 5 Jews say they attend a synagogue at least once per month, compared with about 1/3 to U.S. adults who say they attend religious services as often. So when compared to their national counterparts, the rest of the nations, in particular, the rest of the nation, and in particular they're speaking of the Christian group, they attend religious services, 33%. So they're nearly 13% more of those who attend, non-Jews who attend religious services as compared to Jews. But it gets worse. It gets worse. Same paper. 8 in 10 Orthodox Jews, and this is the minority, 8 in 10 Orthodox Jews say they attend Jewish religious services at least once or twice a month, including 73% of those who do so at least once a week. That's the Orthodox Jews. But what about the non-Orthodox ones? Worship attendance is less common among conservative and Reform Jews, though most conservative Jews and about half of Reform Jews attend at least a few times a year. Now they moved it from few times per month. The better measurement that they found for the non-Orthodox and the conservative Jews, they had to use an annual scale. Notice they moved it down from attendance per month to now attendance per year. It says worship attendance is less common among conservative and Reform Jews, though most conservative Jews and about half of Reform Jews attend at least a few times a year. Maybe for bar mitzvah, wedding or a funeral. Among Jews who have no particular denominational affiliation, about 9 in 10, or 88%, seldom or never attend Jewish religious services. Is there a dearth in that community to go to Sabbath services? I think so. There's a strong absence from worship services among the Jewish populations of America. Not so with the Christian community. So it would be interesting to see if Donald Trump will also make a proclamation concerning the need for Christians to recognize Sunday, given the strong upsweep that we've seen in religious attendances. And I wanted perhaps just to give you a perspective of that. But here's the Catholics for Catholics. The future in America, U.S., is Catholic. Some of the biggest increases are happening in liberal states such as California, New York, and Chicago. Where sin increased, grace overflowed all the more. Thank you, Jesus, for the gift of Catholic faith, of the Catholic faith. And so the future of America is Catholic. I wanted to give you just one more video as to the future of America being Catholic and how the religious right is coming in line with the political right, and really the political institutions, not just right, political institutions to enshrine the Christian faith in America. Here's this article. It says the future in America, U.S. is Catholic, and that's from the U.S. Catholics. As I showed you the ex-post, here's the video that goes with it.
Look at the significant growth in the 4 largest dioceses in the U.S. L.A. up 139%, Phoenix 23%, New York here 36%, Chicago 52%, and those are just a few of the largest ones, but the trend is across the country.
I love that you mentioned Pope John Paul II. You know, I was actually at World Youth Day many years ago back in Colorado, and I just remember this incredible energy, especially among young Catholics, and not just converts and young Catholics, but people who were curious about what faith really is all about. And so as we celebrate this Holy Weekend, and Easter, of course, is coming up tomorrow, it's really fascinating to watch how this resurgence seems to all be happening once again. It's encouraging, I think.
The resurgence certainly began under Pope Francis, so that we should absolutely acknowledge that. But it is interesting to see this American Pope, this more vibrant Pope, you know, that this trend is picking up even more steam under Pope Leo. Another change from the old, from Pope Francis to Pope Leo, you know, there's also another tradition in the Catholic Church of the priest, and in this case the Pope, washing the feet on Holy Thursday. Traditionally, the Pope will always wash the feet of other priests or bishops because, of course, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples during the Last Supper. But Pope Francis broke from that and washed, which I think is still a very beautiful thing to do. He washed the feet of prisoners.
Yes.
in Rome.
So, do you think, based on what you've seen, that the Catholic Church is suffering church attendance in America? We saw their population has increased. They're having burgeoning increases. So when we see things, we need to see them in full perspective. And here they show that there's an explosion of growth. So there's really no coercion needed to get Catholics to attend Mass, because they give the stats over 100% in many instances where there was dearth. So that is a good thing insofar as they're concerned, and it would not perhaps at this time require a presidential mandate to get Catholics to go back to Mass. So I wanted to get back to where we left off, and if there be a presidential proclamation, of course, I'll be the first to highlight that. So just as there was a presidential proclamation on May 4th, we just saw that there, a presidential proclamation, and many may argue this is church and state interference. I want to show you another proclamation that was made, one that God honored. God was well pleased. Heaven was well pleased with it.